So I watched Ava 2.22 the other day at my friend's house. And to be honest, there's a couple of things that I was a little bit ambivalent about, and I was a little bit okay with. For the first part, I believe that in this movie, the concept in the world of Evangelion is a little bit better explained than the original series, where there was a lot of, like, gaps, where there was kind of like, you once you were immersed in the world, it was kind of like one of those, like, left unsaid things. That being said, the good thing about this movie is that a lot of the relationships between the characters are better explained. By better explained, it runs a gamut of, well, this is how it actually works, to hitting you over the head with a frying pan saying, this is how they respond to each other, this is their relationship, which is both a good and a bad thing in this series. The most noteworthy thing that I noticed about this movie is that Dr. Ikari and Shinji actually have a more clearly defined relationship. In the original series, if you remember correctly, Dr. Ikari and Shinji had this very tenuous, like, estrangement. And it wasn't really explained. It was implied that Dr. Ikari had some issues regarding his family that caused him to purposely estrange himself from the rest of his family to pursue his own work. However, in this series, it's better explained as Dr. Ikari misses his wife, and as a result, Shinji reminds him of the life he once had, and which he's eternally lost to. Which also explains his relationship with Rei. In one of the scenes that I'm clearly remembering right now is when he had the dinner scene with Rei, and there's a superimposement that happens where Rei slowly evolves into his wife in facial features. So it's a very subtle touch, but you can clearly see that Dr. Ikari is superimposing his wife's memory over Rei, which explains why he attempts to get closer to her, but can't get really too close to her, because he's using her as a substitute. Which also explains why he's so estranged from, I'm saying estranged a lot, but for a lack of a better term, estranged from his son, because he is reminded of his failure to protect his wife during the second impact. Also, just the general concept of Shinji as a character in this movie is actually a lot better. Instead of just being a whiny emo kid who's like, woe is me, all this stuff is thrust upon me, I'll never be good, I'm chronically depressed, and, well, to be honest, in the original series, he wasn't a likable character. Like, he was just whining and complaining throughout the entire series. But in this movie, it's actually clearly better defined. Shinji has some really heroic moments that happen. Like, he willingly goes and attacks one of the angels by himself, saying that I'm going to man up, I'm going to take on this thing because this is my responsibility, this is my duty. So, the movie becomes more of like him struggling with his responsibility as an Eva pilot and his struggle with his eternal quest to find, his father's approval. This redefining of Shinji as a character is really good. He becomes a likable character in the sense that, here's this kid who's being forced into this, like, heavy responsibility role, being forced into early adulthood against his will, and he still attempts to try to cope with his new role, but it's understandable where his shortcomings come from, and his frailty comes from. Another thing that's really good about Shinji as a character is that he has a clearly defined value system, which was not defined in Eva, the original series. In this movie, he has a clear-cut thing of, I must protect my friends, the traditional Japanese hero, go friendship, love who and friendship, and all that crap. But it works here because it works as the missing layer, the missing dimension to his character, which was profoundly absent in the first series, I believe. And it's an interesting way of dealing with that archetype. He's very much like, he doesn't want to kill, he's being forced into killing things. Granted, of course, they're a humongous threat to humanity, whatnot, blah 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 blah. You know, angels from the sky, all that stuff. But he's a child. In this series, it's clearly emphasized the fact that he is a child in a teenager's body being forced into adulthood. Also, some of the other interesting things is that the relationships are more clearly defined. Asuka as a character is relationship with Shinji is more clearly defined. In this, she becomes a little bit more basic as like a tsundere type of character. She clearly has affection for the people that she's involved with. You know, she's involved with Shinji. She's involved with, you know, with Misato. And it's clear, and it shows her in a new light that she's really this caring individual, but she's conflicted in her role as an EVA pilot, as a person that's just coming to terms with relationships, because it sets her up in the fact that she's really a lone wolf. That all her life she's been reliant only on herself. She doesn't know how to deal with people because all her relationships involved, hey, you can pilot this giant mecha. This is what you do for us. You kill things, we pat you on the head, say good job, and send you on your way. So she really has, throughout this entire movie, she has this struggle with accepting, you know, regular relationships with people. And that's kind of an interesting dynamic. But it also shows her in a positive light. Like, she has a lot of pride. She's proud of what she does. She defines herself because others have defined her as an EVA pilot. So she takes pride in the fact that people see her as a person with a useful skill. And she goes forth on a lot of these missions on her own saying, you know, I'm the best at what I do. People said I'm the best at what I do. And this is how I define myself. And the only way for me to prove myself as a person with actual worth is being the best pilot I can be. And outshining everyone else. You know, I have to be the best at everything I do. And it shows the weakness in that because of the fact that, you know, she gets outshined a couple of times. And she struggles with this concept that, you know, maybe I can't be the one that does everything by myself. I have to rely on people. Very interesting dynamic with that character. Also, the concept of Rei is going to be is kind of an interesting character design choice this time. Rei, instead of being like super robot, you know, like beep boop boop boop, I do what the system tells me, you know, I'm the individual that everyone just tells to go into battle, you know, I don't have a will of my own, you know, I'm just this animal trapped in a cage being forced to do this. I'm being forced into this scenario over and over again, and that's the only thing I know. She's kind of like Asuka in that sense, which is kind of interesting how they interplay off the tension in the fact that they both define themselves as EVA pilots. I mean, that's all they do in their minds. And there's this natural rivalry that develops. And Asuka, there's a really interesting scene in the elevator where Asuka basically says, "You're just a doll. You do whatever they say." And she's really superimposing her own value system on Rei and seeing it in a negative light as she's slowly developing as a character with her concepts of, you know, relationships versus solitary confinement, self-imposed solitary confinement. And she basically just says, "You're just a puppet of the system," which is dramatic irony to us because she defines herself as a puppet of the system, and she's proud of it. But also, Rei actually has a lot of personality this time around, which is kind of strange. I don't know if it's a good or a bad design choice. It was a very interesting and unique design choice. Rei actually becomes very value system oriented. It shows throughout the entire movie that Rei actually does have a deep connection with Shinji. She likes him. She wants him to be happy, which is not really clearly defined in the original series, I believe. There's a lot of dissonance that happens, a lot of awkward moments that happen as a result of Rei not being able to express herself. In this series, she's a lot more self-expressing. But she does it in, she does it in ways that are kind of subtle, but the audience can see it. But the characters inside the series can't actually see it because she's awkward and she doesn't understand how social interaction works. Things of that nature. But she has like these really intellectual monologues where she talks to her. She basically like tries to understand the relationship she has with Dr. Akari, the relationship she has with Shinji, and she's really selfless in this anime. She really wants Shinji and Dr. Akari to get along because she explains that she feels a sense of warmth when she's around Shinji, when she's around Dr. Akari, and she wants Shinji to share in that because she's actually kind of interpersonal in that aspect because she can sense that Shinji is feeling a little bit lost in his relationship with his father, and she wants to rectify the situation. So there comes that sort of interplay where Rei is actually acting as Dr. Akari's wife. It's kind of creepy, but it's an interesting dynamic that ultimately falls apart. Kind of spoiler warning, by the way. I'm kind of spoiling a little bit. So if you guys haven't actually seen this movie, I'll say go out and see it now. It's an interesting reimagining of the series. But those that have, I'm just going to continue. There's a dinner scene where she wants to make a dinner for everyone. She wants Shinji and the father and Asuka and all of them to get along and to come to this like dinner where they all like connect, make stronger bonds with each other, and really try to understand each other as characters, which ultimately falls apart because another angel attack happens, and the estrangement happens further when Shinji is tasked with the task of taking out the new prototype of Evangelion, which Asuka was supposed to be piloting, but something happened in the system, it turned active, and then it turned into an angel. And as a result, Shinji is forced to kill something that contains his friend, I guess, for lack of a better term. They do see each other as friends in this series, which is kind of interesting. And also potential love interest. There's actually another scene. I'm kind of bouncing back and forth, but I'll get back to that one. And Dr. Akari performs the dummy override, which is a reasonable explanation why Shinji hates his father. Because he says, no, I don't want to kill my friend. I don't want to kill Asuka. I know she's in this robot. You can't make me do it. And Dr. Akari goes, oh, can't I? And he does the dummy override where the Eva goes basically berserk, and he's forced to watch the Eva angel being torn apart before his very eyes. He's forced to see Asuka be inflicted with unmentionable pain because of the synchronization process that happens with the Evangelion. The whole, if it happens to my Eva, I feel it as a side effect of the whole synchronization with the mecha. But he watches his own robot kill Asuka, or at least he thinks that Asuka's dead. And I mean, that's a reasonable explanation why Shinji would hate his father. His father forced him to kill his own friend. For the sake of, the better cause, understandably, this thing was obviously a rogue agent, obviously was, malicious towards humanity and things like that. So there's actually this kind of, ambiguous choice. Did Dr. Akari make the right choice for sacrificing his son's wishes for the sake of what he believed to be the greater good, which was protecting humanity, which was protecting Central Dogma. But it's a really interesting scene that's way better played out in this movie than it was in the series. But also, going back to the relationship between Asuka and Shinji, which is a really interesting take on it. I believe it's actually better done in this movie than it is in the series. Where Asuka and Shinji have this... Eventually, they both of them grow fond of each other, but they don't want to admit it. their relationship is kind of like, there's a tension that happens. You know, obviously, Asuka has a thing for Shinji, but won't admit it. You know, the traditional tsundere thing. And Shinji is kind of like lost for most of the series. He's caught between these two people he deeply cares about, and he says straight out that he cares about these individuals. Asuka more grudgingly than Rei, and you know, there's this really touching scene that happens after the last attack, where Asuka, Rei, and Shinji have to team up against this one angel, and she lays down beside him, says, "Can I lay down beside you?" In the original series, it was she just went up to him, laid down next to him, and Shinji's just like chilling out, listening to his mixtape, as he usually does. And there's this awkward moment in the original series where he kind of looks at her, and he sees that she's like right in his face, and she whispers "Mama," and he goes, you know, "What a baby," and turns around and falls asleep. In this movie, there's actually like a really interesting moment where Asuka goes, "Why do you do this? Why do you do the things you do? Why are you an Eva pilot if you don't have this confidence in yourself? Why you don't have this sense of purpose that I do? Because I define myself as what I am. This is what I am. I am an Eva pilot." And he simply says, and he talks about, his relationship with his father. It's a very touching scene. And there's this kind of growth that you can see that happens. And I believe it's a lot better done in this series than it is in the original series. In the original series, there was a lot of dissonance between the characters. There was a lot of, like, what are we to each other type of thing. And we were kind of, like, just coexisting with each other. In this series, it's like, everyone has a real relationship with each other. It's very clearly defined. There's a lot of growth that happens with the characters. They're not just representations of an ideal, like I believe they were in the first series. Also, let's talk a little bit about the new character, Marie, I believe. Marie shows up in like 4 scenes throughout the entire thing, which is, I find, unusual, because she is the poster child of this movie. She's clearly smack dab on the cover of the DVD, and she shows up in like barely 3 or 4 scenes. To be honest, I don't really see much of a reason why this character exists in this series. She doesn't really do much. If anything, she just introduces the idea that there are other nations with Evas, and she introduces the concept that the Vatican, for some reason, is like, you can only have 3 Evas per country, even though there's an imminent threat on our world. But anyways, Marie is she seems to be like a throwaway character. She's just here to show the other side of, like, ooh, I'm this super berserker crazy chick who actually, like, gets, like, off doing what I'm doing, killing angels and stuff like that. I find it to be, like, really fun. And I'm, like, I'm kind of, like, almost yandere. Not, like, super yandere, but, like, there's that kind of, like, creepiness to her. And she also is the person, which I don't agree with in this movie, that brings Shinji back into the fold after he has his blow-up with his father. And he says, you know what, screw you, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going to go on my own path. I'm going to deal with my own things. I don't want to be an Eva pilot anymore. And she meets him in the subway after, like, the last angel attack of the movie. And she just, like, crashes in, it's a random encounter, I guess. And she basically goes, look, you need to do this because you are the person... You're the only person who can do this, and this is where it gets a little cliche. This is where I stop liking, like, the reimagining of it. She brings him to the surface and says, this is an angel. Look what they did to your Rei. Well, which is actually clearly defined because Rei and Shinji clearly have a thing going on in this series. Like, they clearly like each other, but they haven't admitted it to each other yet. But he's like, look what happened to your love interest, Rei. And he goes, holy crap,
And then he gets into he gets convinced, I need to go back into the Eva and stuff like that. I need to save the woman I love, blah blah blah. And then there's this whole fight scene and stuff like that. And then, but anyways, Marie as a character is the only thing she really does is add on a Deus Ex Machina at the end. I don't find her to be a useful character. They just kind of threw her in. Because I believe someone on the cast, a producer or something like that, was I want this character in here. Find a way to make her work. And it just seems like it's kind of just tacked on. She's just here. She's not necessary. She also introduces another concept, which I really don't like. In Mecha, there's always this soul of the machine type thing. Deep inside this mecha somehow lies there's a spirit where humanity and robot combine and make this super powered mode and stuff like that. It's the power of souls, the power of fighting and stuff like that. And now Eva is no different. There's this override system called the Beast that Marie introduces into it when she's fighting one of the particularly powerful angels with a really powerful AT field. She activates this super over 9,000 mode where the creature goes berserk. And there's this, Claymore type of thing that happens where it's if I get pushed beyond my limits of beast mode, I'll eventually lose my humanity and become full angel, blah, 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 yakety schmackety. Which I find to be not necessary in this series at all. There's no reason why there's this Claymore type thing. Because in Claymore, the concept of using beast mode is actually a choice, a sense of, that's a main plot point of the thing. Are Claymores are Claymores human, or are they monsters that have chosen to become monsters by their own personal wishes, by necessity, by etc. 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 That's a central plot point in that series. In this, it just seems like it's just tacked on. Here you go. We have we have this Super Saiyan mode that could make people go insane. We'll just add this in because, this is the cool thing to do nowadays, I guess. And, which also leads to my least favorite part of this movie. Again, huge spoiler warnings. Shinji's power source goes out, like it does in the original series. But they use this beast mode mechanic where it's I want to save Rey! I want to save the woman I love! And somehow he turns beast mode without actually realizing that beast mode actually exists. So it's that super cliche, the hero taps into his unknown power he didn't know he had, and all of a sudden he's clearly he's the greatest of the Eva pilots. He's done this without prior knowledge and experience in doing this. And it's just, oh my god, it's super cliche. And obviously he saves the girl by maxing his limits, but somehow he ignores the, negative effects of beast mode. He actually comes back from it, and it's like a Deus Ex Machina on top of a Deus Ex Machina. It's why does this exist? It's unnecessary. I really don't like it. But yeah, another good thing about it, I'll go back to the positive and slowly wrap this up because I've been kind of prattling on for a little while. There's still the traditional Evangelion mind-bending moments where you expect certain thing to happen and it's nah, actually they die. But like I said before, the Dr. Ikari override was a good mind screw. Also, the Asuka, yeah, the moment where Asuka is dies in the Eva immediately afterwards. Well, dies in quotation marks. They actually bring her back to life, which is something I didn't agree with at all, because of the fact that it would have been a really good moment if, well, not really really good, but a really powerful moment if Shinji actually killed her, and then he would have to deal with the consequences of, the fact that he was powerless to stop the Eva from killing his friend. And he would have to deal with it, which would be another reason why Shinji's so screwed up at the end in the original series. At least if they were trying to tie it into the original series, that would make sense. But also, on an unrelated note, Ryoji is one of my favorite characters, along with Misato. I love those two. I love that couple. I love them both. They're awesome. And Ryoji is such a boss in this series. Like, he trolls everyone. There's this scene where, like, Shinji is, like, just, like, moping around being Shinji in the traditional sense. And Ryoji just comes out and offers him, like, a canned coffee. And he's like, blah, 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 blah. And he, like, leans in and he goes, by the way, love knows no bounds. And he leans in and Shinji's like, what the heck? Like, he's about to kiss him. And then there's this cutout where it goes to something else. And then he just brushes past him and he goes, nah, I'm just kidding. It's just like this awesome moment where he's just like, he trolls everyone. Oh my, it's awesome. I love the interplay between him. I love the interplay between him and Misato. It's great. No, and I also like how they also like went into more of his character about, you know, his whole wistfulness and his whole, like, he's really centered in who he is. He really understands who he is as a person. He understands how tragic it is for all these people, or all these pilots, to deal with situations that are beyond their scope, they're asking way too much of them, and he really sympathizes with them. And there's this really touching scene where he takes Misato out at a bar, and they just have this moment where they're just, like, talking about the pilots and, like, how messed up it is, and how, you know, it adds a very human dimension to this character. I would argue that Ryoji was the most human out of everyone in the original series. Like, he's more of a jerk in the original series. In this one, he's actually a lot more likable. He has a lot of humanity to him. They outplay the fact that he's a gardener, and he takes Shinji out to the garden, and he, like, teaches him, you know, why he loves gardening. You know, it's that peacefulness, it's that, you know, reconnection with the roots, to really understand what it means to be human through helping life move along and stuff like that. And he's this really, like, mentor type of character in this series. I feel that it was actually really necessary, and I feel he was more relevant to the plot than the new character is, in helping Shinji kind of come to terms with his responsibilities, with the actions that he will have to undertake in the future. And he's just a very solid overall character, and I love how they incorporated him more in this series. Misato is Misato. She's the same character that she will always be. And that's a good thing. More of the same is a good thing with her. I love that character. The characters are a lot more in depth. The plotline is actually way better explained than it is in the original series. For better or worse. But, clearly, the director was more like, about this, we're going to actually develop our characters more, than rather just being personifications of an ideal, personifications of a mood, a setting. So they just feel more fleshed out and lifelike. And there's a lot more dramatic irony that happens. There's still the traditional, like, Ava plays quiet music while screwed up things happen in the background that you've come to love with this series. Love or hate, I guess. But yeah, it's a great... I enjoyed the experience wholeheartedly. I'm looking forward to 3.0 when that comes out. But anyways, it was good.